Lecture 7, Comparing and Contrasting Propp and Bremond. Introduction. Hello everyone, and welcome to Lecture 7. Today we're diving into a fascinating topic that sits at the heart of narrative theory, the ideas of Vladimir Propp and Claude Bremond. These two intellectual giants represent pivotal moments in structuralist analysis, and while they both aimed to uncover the hidden mechanisms of storytelling, their approaches, philosophies, and applications couldn't be more different. Think of it this way. If Propp was meticulously mapping a single well-trodden path through the forest of stories, Bremond was drawing a complex, branching network of every possible trail, detour, and dead end. This lecture will explore their key similarities, pinpoint their crucial differences, and ultimately, trace the broader shift in how we understand narrative, moving from a linear, predetermined journey to a dynamic, branching set of possibilities. By the end of this session, you'll have a solid grasp of how these two theorists shaped our understanding of narrative and why both of their frameworks remain incredibly relevant for analyzing everything from ancient myths to modern video games. So as key similarities, let's begin by looking at what Propp and Bremond actually shared in common. Despite their significant divergences, there are fundamental principles that link their work. Focus on universal structures. First, and perhaps most importantly, both theorists were driven by the same core ambition: to identify underlying, universal patterns in storytelling. They believed that beneath the surface diversity of countless tales, there were fundamental structural principles at play. Propp, as we've discussed in previous lectures, focused intently on Russian folktales. Through his rigorous analysis, he identified 31 fixed functions, recurring actions that drive the plot forward, and 7 character roles, such as the hero, the villain, and the helper. His aim was to systematize these tales to show that despite superficial variations, they all followed a remarkably similar blueprint. Bremond, building on and critiquing Propp, also sought universal structures. However, his scope was much broader. He proposed elementary sequences, what he called triads, of potentiality, process, and result. He also identified roles, but his were far more fluid and relational: subject, helper, opponent, and so on. Bremond believed these sequences and roles could be applied to any narrative, not just folktales. So, while their specific findings differed, their foundational goal was the same: to find the universal grammar of storytelling. Functional units. Secondly, both Propp and Bremond agreed that the core units of narrative analysis are actions, or functions, rather than characters, themes, or settings. For Propp, this was explicit in his concept of functions. He argued that what matters most in a story is what an action does to advance the plot, not who performs it or why they do it. For example, villainy is a function. Whether the villain is a dragon, a witch, or a jealous stepmother, the action of villainy serves the same narrative purpose, creating a problem for the hero. These functions, for Propp, are fixed plot points that occur in an immutable sequence. Bremond too focused on actions, which he termed processes. However, his processes were more fluid and interactive. They weren't fixed plot points, but rather dynamic interactions within a sequence. Think of processes like decision-making or outcome. These aren't static. They unfold and can lead to various subsequent actions based on choices made within the narrative. The key takeaway here is that both shifted the focus of narrative analysis away from surface-level elements and towards the underlying functional relationships between narrative units. Influence on later theories. Finally, a significant shared aspect is their profound influence on later structuralist and post-structuralist thought. Both Propp and Bremond laid crucial groundwork that subsequent theorists either built upon, reacted against, or refined. For instance, A.J. Grimes's actantial model, a highly influential structuralist framework, is a direct descendant of both Propp's character roles and Bremond's more dynamic understanding of narrative functions. Grimes took Propp's roles and generalized them into abstract actants: sender, object, receiver, subject, helper, opponent, allowing for even greater flexibility in analysis. Furthermore, their work has been instrumental in the development of computational narrative systems and artificial intelligence in storytelling. The idea of breaking down stories into discrete, programmable units, whether fixed functions or branching sequences, is central to how computers generate or analyze narratives today. So, even in the age of AI, their intellectual legacy continues to resonate. 2. Core differences. Now that we've established their common ground, let's dive into the fascinating and more extensive differences between Propp and Bremond. This is where their philosophical and methodological distinctions truly come into focus. Aspect. Propp. Bremond. Structure. Linear sequence of 31 functions. Network of branching elementary sequences. Character roles. Fixed character roles, hero, villain. Fluid roles, e.g., helper, opponent. Cultural scope. Specific to Russian fairy tales. Adaptable to global narratives. Agency. Predetermined outcomes. Open-ended possibilities. Resolution. Singular, amelioration. Cyclical, amelioration, degradation. Export to sheets. Linearity versus branching logic. This is arguably the most significant divergence. Propp's model is fundamentally linear and teleological. It assumes a fixed, predetermined path where each of his 31 functions inexorably leads to the next. Think of it like a train track. Struggle must lead to victory, which must lead to return, and so on. The narrative is a one-way street, always progressing towards a singular, preordained conclusion. Propp's structure reflects a very specific kind of narrative logic, often found in simple folktales, where events unfold in a predictable cause and effect chain. Bremond, however, critiqued this. He argued that Propp's rigid sequence reflected cultural stereotypes of European folktales, not a universal narrative logic. He felt it was too prescriptive and didn't account for the dynamic nature of storytelling. In stark contrast, Bremond's model is a network of branching elementary sequences. For him, a potentiality, say, discovering a crime, doesn't lead to one fixed outcome. Instead, it opens up a series of decision points. From discovering a crime, a character might choose to investigate, or perhaps show indifference, or even engage in collaboration with the perpetrator. Each choice spawns a new sequence, creating a dynamic, interwoven web of possibilities. This model is far more reflective of how narratives often operate, offering choices and alternative paths. This fundamental difference in structure, linear versus branching, underpins many of their other divergences. Role flexibility. Connected to the structural difference is how they view character roles. For Propp, roles are static and fixed. A donor, once introduced, remains a donor. A villain remains a villain. They cannot suddenly transform into a helper. The character's identity is intrinsically tied to their singular narrative function. Propp's model is excellent for analyzing archetypal characters in formulaic genres, where roles are clearly defined and unchanging. Bremond, on the other hand, saw roles as fluid and relational. A character's role isn't fixed, but changes based on their actions and interactions within a given sequence. A character who initially acts as an opponent by blocking progress might, through a shift in circumstances or motivation, become a helper later, aiding in the resolution of a problem. Their role is defined by their relationship to the narrative's progress, not by an inherent, immutable identity. This flexibility allows Bremond to analyze more complex, nuanced narratives where character arcs involve shifts in allegiance, motivation, or function. Cultural adaptability. This difference is crucial when we consider the cultural scope of their theories. Propp's functions, while brilliant for Russian folktales, falter significantly outside European narrative traditions. For example, if you try to apply Propp's model to, say, Yoruba stories from West Africa, you quickly run into issues. Many Yoruba narratives prioritize communal judgment and collective action over individual heroism. Propp's emphasis on a singular hero undergoing a quest doesn't neatly fit. His model is culturally specific, a product of the specific corpus he analyzed. Bremond's model, with its more abstract elementary sequences and fluid roles, is far more adaptable to a wider range of global narratives. It can accommodate nonlinear traditions, like cyclical indigenous myths that emphasize repetition and renewal rather than a singular beginning, middle, end progression. It also easily applies to modern media, especially interactive forms like player-driven video games, where the audience's choices directly influence the branching paths of the narrative. This adaptability makes Bremond's framework a more versatile tool for comparative narrative studies. agency. Another key difference lies in their implicit understanding of agency within a narrative. For Propp, the narrative is driven by predetermined outcomes. Once a function occurs, the next in the sequence is almost inevitable. The characters have very little true agency. They are pawns moving along a preordained plotline. The hero will inevitably overcome the villain and achieve victory. This is why Propp's model is so good for analyzing highly formulaic genres. Bremond conversely emphasizes open-ended possibilities. His branching sequences are all about choices and their consequences. A potentiality creates a moment of decision, and the outcome is not predetermined. Characters, or in interactive media, players, have genuine agency to influence the unfolding of the narrative. This makes Bremond's model far more capable of capturing narratives where uncertainty, free will, and multiple outcomes are central. Resolution. Finally, consider how they handle narrative resolution. Propp's model, especially for folktales, almost always leads to a singular amelioration, or a happy ending. The hero marries the princess, the villain is vanquished, balance is restored. There's a clear, definitive, and positive resolution. Bremond, breaking free from this constraint, allows for cyclical resolutions, specifically the concept of amelioration, degradation. This means a narrative can end well, poorly, or even cycle between positive and negative states. A story might start with a situation of degradation, move to amelioration, only to fall back into degradation. Think of stories like Shakespeare's Macbeth, where the protagonist's initial amelioration, becoming king, quickly descends into degradation, tyranny, and eventual downfall. This allows Bremond to account for tragedy, moral ambiguity, and ongoing conflicts, which Propp's model struggles with. These 5 core differences highlight the philosophical chasm between Propp's rigid, deterministic approach and Bremond's flexible, possibility-driven framework. 3. Evolution. From linear functions to branching possibilities. This brings us to a crucial point: the evolution of narrative theory itself. The shift from Propp to Bremond reflects a broader intellectual movement, from focusing on rigid structures to embracing more dynamic and open-ended systems. Propp's legacy. Let's be clear, Propp's work is not obsolete. It has immense strengths, particularly in providing a clear, powerful template for analyzing formulaic genres. If you want to dissect a classic fairy tale, a superhero origin story, or even a romantic comedy, Propp's 31 functions offer an incredibly precise and effective analytical tool. They allow us to see the underlying scaffolding of these highly structured narratives. However, his model also has significant limitations. It struggles with ambiguity, such as narratives with unresolved endings or open questions. It also falters when confronted with cultural hybridity, stories that blend different narrative traditions. Take Pan's Labyrinth, for example. It blends dark Spanish folklore with the historical drama of the Spanish Civil War. Propp's model, with its fixed functions and roles, would struggle to capture the complex interplay of these disparate elements and the inherent ambiguities of the protagonist's journey. Bremond's innovations. Bremond's innovations directly addressed many of Propp's limitations, pushing narrative theory towards a more sophisticated understanding. His concept of dynamic networks means narratives are no longer seen as single lines, but as webs of potentialities. Choices, events, and character interactions spawn new sequences, exploring a much more fluid causality. This allows for a deeper analysis of how plot points emerge from a series of decisions and contingent events, rather than being simply preordained. As we discussed, Bremond also introduced the idea of degradation cycles. Unlike Propp's singular happy ending, Bremond allowed for unresolved or degradative outcomes. This is vital for analyzing tragedies, stories with moral ambiguities, or narratives where things simply don't resolve neatly. Think of Macbeth's descent into tyranny, as mentioned earlier. Bremond's framework can account for that decline, whereas Propp's focus on amelioration would struggle. Perhaps most presciently, Bremond's branching logic perfectly underpins interactive media. This is where his theory truly shines in the 21st century. Choice-driven games like Detroit, Become Human, where player decisions dramatically alter the narrative path and outcomes, are textbook examples of Bremondian narrative structures. His work also informs transmedia storytelling, where characters and their roles can shift and evolve across different platforms and narrative iterations. Bremond's work essentially provided the theoretical framework for understanding narratives in a way that allows for greater complexity, dynamism, and audience participation. AV, where each system excels. So given these differences, when should you use Propp and when should you use Bremond? Both are valuable tools, but they excel in different analytical contexts. Propp's strengths. Propp's framework is ideal for dissecting rigidly structured tales and formulaic genres. If you're looking at a classic Disney film like Snow White, Propp's functions provide a perfectly fitting analytical lens. You can easily map the villainy of the evil queen, the magical intervention of the dwarves, the struggle, and the triumph of the hero. It's also an excellent pedagogical tool. For students new to structuralism or narrative theory, Propp's model simplifies complex narrative mechanics into understandable sequential units. It's a great starting point for understanding how stories are put together. Furthermore, Propp's work is invaluable for cultural preservation and understanding specific storytelling conventions. By meticulously documenting the structure of Russian oral traditions, he provided a powerful method for preserving and analyzing unique cultural narrative forms. Bremond's advantages. Bremond, on the other hand, truly shines in cross-cultural studies. His adaptable model allows researchers to analyze diverse narrative traditions that don't fit a linear, hero-centric mold. For example, when studying African folktales that might emphasize communal roles or a circular understanding of time, Bremond's more flexible approach is far more appropriate. He's also the go-to theorist for modern media, especially non-linear and interactive storytelling. Think of films like Inception, with its nested dream layers and ambiguous ending. Propp would struggle to make sense of its intricate, multi-layered structure. But Bremond's idea of branching possibilities and fluid causality is much better equipped to handle it. And of course, for interactive narratives like Bandersnatch, the Black Mirror choose-your-own-adventure episode, Bremond's theories are directly applicable, explaining the underlying logic of player choice and diverging plot lines. Finally, Bremond excels at analyzing complex character arcs and morally ambiguous figures. Propp's fixed roles simply can't account for a character like Walter White from Breaking Bad, who shifts from a seemingly ordinary chemistry teacher to a ruthless drug lord. Bremond's relational roles, where a character's function changes based on their actions and context, are perfect for understanding such profound transformations and moral ambiguities. Case studies, applying both models. To really solidify our understanding, let's briefly apply both models to some well-known narratives. Cinderella, Proppian analysis. Let's take the classic fairy tale of Cinderella. This is a perfect fit for Propp's model. Functions. We can easily trace functions like villainy, the stepmother's oppression, forcing Cinderella into servitude. This leads to a lack, Cinderella's desire to go to the ball. Then comes magical intervention, the fairy godmother appearing and providing the gown and carriage. This enables a struggle, Cinderella attending the ball and charming the prince, leading to triumph, the prince finding her with the glass slipper. And finally, marriage and amelioration. Cinderella marries the prince and lives happily ever after. Roles. The roles are equally clear. Hero, Cinderella. Villain, stepmother, stepsisters. Donor, fairy godmother. Helper, mice, birds. Dispatcher, prince's invitation to the ball. And false hero, stepsisters trying on the slipper. Cinderella beautifully demonstrates the predictive power and clear structure that Propp's model offers for formulaic narratives. The Last of Us, Bremondian analysis. Now for something entirely different. The Last of Us, particularly the first game. This narrative, while having a clear journey, is much more suited to a Bremondian analysis due to its moral ambiguities and character complexity. Branching sequences. The entire narrative is driven by Joel's choices. A key potentiality is the task of escorting Ellie. This leads to numerous processes and decision points. Joel's choice to save Ellie at the end, rather than sacrificing her for a potential cure, is a massive branching point. This choice fundamentally alters their roles. He transitions from a protector to also an opponent, to the fireflies, and even, in a complex way, an opponent to Ellie's implicit desire for purpose. This single choice spawns an entirely new sequence of moral and relational consequences. Degradation. The ending of The Last of Us doesn't offer a simple amelioration. Instead, it plunges us into profound moral ambiguity, a classic example of Bremond's amelioration, degradation dynamic. Joel achieves his goal of saving Ellie, which is an amelioration from his perspective, but it comes at the cost of countless lives and a potential cure for humanity, which is a degradation for the broader world. The ending is neither happy nor completely tragic. It's a cyclical, morally gray outcome that invites debate and reflection, perfectly captured by Bremond's model. Conclusion. In wrapping up, it's clear that Vladimir Propp and Claude Bremond represent two distinct yet equally vital poles of narrative theory. Propp, the meticulous systematizer, sought order and predictability, mapping the linear progression of tales. Bremond, the flexible innovator, embraced fluidity, choice, and the branching possibilities of narrative. While Propp's linear model remains invaluable for dissecting formulaic genres and understanding specific cultural storytelling conventions, Bremond's branching logic better captures the dynamism, complexity, and fluid causality inherent in a vast array of narratives, particularly those found in our globalized interactive media landscape. Their interplay highlights a fundamental and ongoing tension in narrative analysis, the tension between inherent structure and spontaneous creativity, between the predictable and the unpredictable. Understanding both frameworks provides us with a robust toolkit to analyze, appreciate, and even create stories in a more nuanced way. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into Propp and Bremond. I hope this lecture has given you a clearer understanding of their contributions and how they continue to shape our understanding of storytelling. Thank you.